Good morning. Good morning. I don't think I've ever heard such a lively group out there. It's a new year, is that it? Good weather. Anyway. I'm Carolyn Connor, and I'm a member here, and every once in a while I stand up here and moderate, and I'm really tickled pink to be here again with you all. I want to make sure that you remember to look at the social media and also to look at what is up on the wall before church and then after church too for announcements. Please silence cell phones. Just everybody looking, remembering. We have several exits, one up here, one there, and of course to the back in the event of an emergency. I want to welcome all the live stream guests. I have been home out of commission for a while and really enjoyed the live stream, and I just feel more connected to that live stream audience now. So welcome you all and enjoy today's service. I wonder if anybody here has brought a visitor that you'd like to introduce. Nobody? How about, are there any visitors you brought yourself? And you are brave enough to stand up and tell us who you are and from where you come. Well, my goodness. Either that or we're just all family today. I don't know.
The hometown crowd.
The hometown crowd. I was going to remind the visitors that we have a luncheon today, and they could attend free of charge, and we would invite them to do that. And then I want to remind the rest of you to please head on back to Conover and enjoy a lunch. I think that's it for today. So, very welcome, and Dr. Reverend Kendyl Gibbons will give us our words of gathering. Thank you.
Again, good morning and welcome to this gathering. My late colleagues George Odell and Ken Patton offer these words of invitation. It is good to be together. We are glad that you are here. We have arrived out of many singular rooms, traveling over the branching streets. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We come together here to be assured that our siblings surround us and to restore their images upon our eyes. We need one another when we are in despair or in temptation and need to be recalled to our best selves once again. Here we enlarge our voices in common speaking and singing. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. Here we try again that solitude found in the midst of those who with us seek their own hidden reckonings. We need one another in the hour of success when we look for someone to share our triumphs. Here our eyes reclaim the remembered faces and their voices stir the surrounding air. We need one another in the hour of defeat, when with encouragement we might endure and stand again. Here the warmth of hands assures us, and the gladness of our spoken names. We need one another when we come to die, and would have gentle hands to prepare us for that journey. All our lives, we are in need of others, and others are in need of us. This is the reason of cities, of homes, of assemblies in the houses of fellowship. We need one another, and it is good to be together. As we kindle our chalice this morning, may we each renew our intention to be present for one another, in compassion for the pain that each of us carries, in justice for those who suffer oppression, in gratitude for those whose many gifts are blessings in our lives, in love and benevolence for all beings that are part of the interdependent web.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Cyan, and I light this chalice for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Good job. Thank you. Now let's join together by rising in body or spirit and speaking once again the words of our covenant with one another. Together we affirm goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And let's stay standing for our opening hymn.
Gather the Spirit, harvest the power. Our separate fires will kindle one flame. Witness the mystery of this hour. Our passion in light appear all same. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit of heart and mind. Seeds for the sowing are laid in stone. Nurtured in love and conscience refined, with body and spirit united once more. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the Spirit growing in all, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun. Winter to spring and summer to fall, the forest of life resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion and strength. Gather to celebrate once again.
Good morning. Today is the Sunday that we invited you to bring your guest at your table boxes back. And your donations go to the Unitarian Universalist Services Committee to help migrant families fleeing poverty and violence in their home countries. And by donating to this worthy cause, you are living our Unitarian Universalist principle of honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person, whoever they are and wherever they're from. If you brought your boxes today, please come during the offering and put them down on the table in front. Some of the boxes have already been returned and are down here. And if you forgot your box, don't worry. Just bring it next Sunday. Thank you so much for your generosity.
Several weeks ago, before the holiday season descended, about 30 of us gathered to celebrate the arrival of Sage Fitzpatrick, daughter of Heather Cochran and Ryan Fitzpatrick, and little sister of Cyan, our chalice lighter this morning, by assembling a baby quilt for little Sage. That quilt has now been finished by our talented fabric artist, Cynthia Butcher, and today we present it with our love to Sage and her family. Would you come forward? Yeah. Heather chose a sweet palette of rose, lilac, and ivory, and we all had fun putting this project together. So Judith and Cynthia, there's the finished quilt. Yay. Yeah. So let's have all those who were present that day and helped us with the quilt stand up. Would you rise if you were there? There they are. Yay. And Cynthia, I think you have another gift.
I do, because we always like to help the only child who has given up their position to the new one with the transition. And this time, it happens to be a child I really know and teach. So, Cyan, we have a special thing for you, too.
Show us the front. I think that's the extra square that we did, right, on the front of that. So, yeah, there you go. Oh, okay.
I'm a rebel girl.
Yay.
She is.
So we welcome Sage to our community and congratulate her sister and her parents and hope that this quilt continues to surround her with the warmth of our love. Yeah. And now all of the children will depart for their classes, and we will dismiss them with song.
Go now in peace, may love guide all your ways. Beauty be the blessing of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Faith to follow where the human spirit leads.
The Church of the Larger Fellowship is a virtual UU congregation available to people who, for whatever reason, cannot access a local UU community in person. One group of such people are those incarcerated in jails and prisons. While theoretically still free to practice whatever religion they choose, inmates are often subjected to high-pressure evangelism by fundamentalist Christians and Muslims. Many who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender have no idea that a religious community exists where they would be welcome and treated with dignity. The prison ministry of the CLF offers spiritual and pastoral support and a theological alternative to prisoners through newsletters and other reading material, as well as personal correspondence. For the more than 800 incarcerated persons served by the Church of the Larger Fellowship Prison Ministry, this connection is life-giving and sanity-saving. Many of these members pour out their hearts and thoughts in letters to the ministers at the CLF. John C., incarcerated in Colorado, wrote this: "Being in prison is like being dead. Nothing matters. People fall out of your life. The world passes you by and forgets about you. You become a ghost, haunting the walls of a house you don't have anymore. Vast stretches of galloping boredom are punctuated by shocking eruptions of hate and violence, and that's all there is. Prison takes everything there is to being human away from you and replaces it with rabid tedium. It makes the very measure and essence of your life, time, your mortal enemy." Our collection this month will be shared with the prison ministry of the Church of the Larger Fellowship to help bring human connection and spiritual growth to human beings whom much of our society has thrown away. I invite you to consider how much Unitarian Universalist outreach could offer to people in these circumstances, and give as generously as you might hope people would if you were on the other side of the bars. In this spirit, this morning's offering will now be given and gratefully received, and you are invited to bring your guest at the table boxes forward. Will you join me in a somewhat more verbal dedication of our offering? Together, we dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
I think this is highly by their own affection for us. There's our friends. Well, of course, our friends are not going to tell us certain things about our characters, the ways in which we're difficult in particular, because all they really want from us is a pleasant evening out. They don't care. You really have to care about someone to be bothered to go into all that stuff about their true character. And our friends, they can't be bothered. They don't like us enough. So it leaves then that other category, our exes. Well, our exes, you could expect that they will, somewhere along the lines, have told us. But the thing, on the whole, it's not really worth their while either. And so they tend to take their leave by saying things like they need to spend more time on their own, they need to develop their character, they'd like to go traveling. Nonsense. Of course not. They see certain things about you, but again, they're not going to go through it. They can't be bothered. They just want out. Let somebody else sort that out. So the thing is that we go through life not really knowing. I mean, it's very tender and poignant how sometimes some of us feel, probably some of you in the audience feel, that broadly speaking, you're quite easy to live with. I mean, does anyone here think that they're kind of broadly speaking easy to live with, if only they met the right person? Like, a few people, that's a very poignant combination, whereby a very romantic combination. I spent my early 20s absolutely convinced that the only thing that was missing was really the right person. And so long as I met the right person, then all would be well. So this notion that we might be easy to live with is deeply misleading and should be stamped out. Of course, we're not. Everybody from close up is trouble, and we need to put this in mind. Bear this in mind.
From a column in the Washington Post by George Will. Loneliness in epidemic proportions is producing a literature of sociological and medical findings about the effect of loneliness on individuals' brains and bodies and communities. There is a growing consensus that loneliness, not obesity, cancer, or heart disease, is the nation's #1 crisis. Persistent loneliness reduces average longevity more than twice as much as does heavy drinking, and more than 3 times as much as obesity, which often is a consequence of loneliness. Former U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy argues that the effects of loneliness are as detrimental to the human body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We're literally dying of despair, of the failure to fill the hole millions of Americans feel in their lives. Today, one reason the average American lifespan has declined for 3 consecutive years is that many more are dying annually of drug overdoses, one of the diseases of despair, than died during the entire Vietnam War. In the last quarter of the 20th century, the average number of times Americans entertained at home declined almost 50%. Americans are hyper-connected but disconnected, with fewer non-virtual friends than at any point in decades. With a median American checking, according to a Pew survey, a smartphone every 4.3 minutes, and with nearly 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds online almost every waking minutes, to check a smartphone 4.3 minutes, with nearly 40% of those 18 to 29 online almost every waking minute, we are addicted to distraction and parched for genuine community. Social media, with those tendrils of resentment that accelerate political anger, create a nuance-free outrage loop for professional rage peddlers and for people for whom enemies have the psychic value of giving life coherence. We do know that more saturation of society with politics is not a sufficient answer. The crumbling of America's social infrastructure presents a daunting challenge. We do not know how to develop what the experts call for: new habits of mind and heart, new practices of neighborliness.
Mend What You Can by Reverend Heather Liu. People are annoying and hurtful. They don't listen to our ideas. They don't respect our leadership. They talk about us behind our backs. They are inflexible and rude. They are too sensitive. They insist on their own way. They think differently than we do. They don't show up when they say they will. They can't forgive and forget. People are hurtful and annoying. True, right? True of strangers, true in our closest relationships, and true in middle spaces like religious community. Many of us deal with pain and irritation in our relationships by moving away, physically, emotionally, or both. I know I certainly have. It's easier to run than to address the conflict directly. Family systems therapists call this emotional cutoff, and they say that we cannot really move away from our pain. We may move away from a situation or relationship, but we recreate the same dynamics until we learn to resolve them. Moving away is a completely valid strategy for keeping ourselves safe in vulnerable situations. We move towards safety so that we can get strong enough to move toward relationship. Too many of us, however, move toward safety, feel relief, and stop. We don't do the work of getting strong. We experience ourselves as vulnerable and continue to move away from pain and irritation until we find ourselves alone and wonder why. The path of healing is to mend what we can, beginning with the smallest tears in fabric that carries the least emotional weight. One stitch at a time, we discover our strength and courage. This is work that we must do. The world is dangerously frayed. We all need to mend what we can to repair the world. There is a story from back in the day when parish clergy rode their horses around the town, visiting the members of their congregations, particularly those who were backsliding in some way. One old fellow, growing more and more taciturn with age, had not been in attendance at the Sunday meeting for more than a month. Yet, since he was seen going about his business as usual here and there in the village, the minister concluded that he was not ill and went to call on him to see what he had to say for himself. What he had to say, as it turned out, was nothing at all. He opened the door, saw the parson, and waved him into the kitchen, indicating a chair next to the coal stove, and sat down himself without uttering a word, waiting for his visitor to begin the conversation. The minister, sensing that any spoken admonition would be met with silent disdain, pondered how to proceed. After several minutes, he picked up the fire tongs and lifted one brightly glowing coal out of the fire in the stove. Sitting by itself on the coal shovel, the ember quickly died out to a cold black lump, which the two of them contemplated. The minister then quietly replaced the lump amidst the other burning coals, where it was soon glowing warm and red again. He then got up, nodded to his host, and departed, all without speaking a word. The old fellow was back in church the next week and never missed a Sunday after that, or so it is said. The start of a new church year is always a time to review our habits and intentions. Are we actually living the life we tell ourselves we want? How might any of us be more authentically whole and loving, more nearly the people we aspire to become? I want to suggest this morning that this process needs to be something more than just internal and personal. Our individual experiences of social isolation, for instance, amount to a collective health threat, what George Will refers to in his Washington Post column as an epidemic of loneliness. That epidemic has quantifiable, surprisingly serious impact on our mortality, morbidity, and quality of life. Not having a robust cadre of friends or an active social life can physically hurt you as much as smoking, excessive drinking, or obesity. It also leaves you vulnerable to what are now collectively termed diseases of despair, including drug addiction and suicide. The benefits of belonging, of having a community, are not just about entertainment or feeling good. They are actually life-sustaining, as necessary as vitamins, movement, sunshine, or nutrition, and just as deadly to be deprived of. This, as Ken Patton reminds us, is the reason for cities, for homes, and assemblies in the houses of fellowship. It is good and good for us to be with one another. We are, after all, social creatures, a social species. Unlike a solitary turtle or hawk, human beings make no evolutionary or ecological sense in isolation. Only in the imaginings of fevered philosophers do we exist as entirely separate individuals. In order to observe human existence, you must observe human interaction. That is where meaning is made and the essence of humanity is displayed. For almost a quarter of a century now, since at least the publication of Robert Putnam's widely read study, Bowling Alone, in 1995, the bemoaning of American culture's loss of social capital has become something of an intellectual cottage industry. By any definition that does not include Facebook, most folks in this country have measurably fewer friends than they used to, fewer others they can call on for help. We belong to fewer organized groups, socialize less, sing together less, do anything that requires group cooperation less than we did 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. Actually, American culture has been chipping away at our rootedness in community for much longer than that. For those with European ancestry, being the descendants of immigrants means that our forebears were necessarily people who would leave behind a lot of family and hometown for the sake of uncertain opportunities to build a better life elsewhere. Kidnapped Africans were wrenched away from all family and community ties to be sold into slavery, where connections to people and places could be wiped out repeatedly at any moment. Those of the indigenous peoples here who were not destroyed were almost entirely removed from their native lands and sacred spaces and strenuously urged to abandon their languages and their cultures. The rise of corporate capitalism has demanded a steady stream of workers willing to be transferred to wherever they were needed, requiring nuclear families to rebuild local community connections over and over again. We live in a society which assumes that we can and will pursue the life we want from place to place, recreating connections with groups that we happen to find along the way. In some cases, we may bring a minimal family unit with us, spouse and or children, or more rarely, elderly parents. But many other moves, including those occasioned by divorce or marriage or children leaving home, involve separations within even the most basic domestic structures. Such flexibility in human connectedness is considered normal and appropriate by our culture, but it is not necessarily the way of most societies across history. Moreover, rugged American individualism teaches us to beware of how oppressive the structures of connection can be. Domestic violence, the physical and emotional abuse of spouses and children, is seen as resolved only when the victim is removed from the power of the abuser. Destructive family dynamics protect secrets of shame and generations of resentment about inappropriate sex, mental health struggles, or financial exploitation. Small town prejudices make life miserable for anyone who is different in their sexual identity, physical appearance, or mental ability. Schools and churches seek to enforce conformity, punishing those who ask questions or point out hypocrisy. Family businesses absorb and obliterate the creative potential of children, forced to carry them on. Young people are pressured into marriages for the advantage of their elders. Needy or overly critical friends sap us of energy and well-being. All these are tropes that encourage us to find our integrity and wholeness in separation, by repudiating the oppressive claims of community and freeing our individual selves to pursue our own unique life projects and satisfactions. It's all true, of course. Community can be coercive. in ways that are repressive to what is unique, original, or questioning in its individual members. The problem is that is not the only truth about human connection. First of all, like many other nutrients that can be poisonous in excess, we nevertheless require the bonds of social networks in order to be fully human and to thrive. All our lives, we are in need of others, and they are in need of us. Also, the disciplines of community that may sometimes require the sacrifice of our personal impulses are not always a bad thing. Many people at many times are restrained from foolish, selfish, or destructive acts by external cultural sanctions, anywhere on the spectrum from peer disapproval to laws. The collective wisdom is in fact sometimes wise and saves us from having to learn about reality by making every possible mistake for ourselves. The consumerism of our culture has responded to the continuing felt need for community by turning it into yet another commodity of choice. If the family we were born into is too irritating, we can gather a better one by serving the right wine to our friends. If the potential romantic partners we happen to encounter locally are not up to snuff, we can shop for a better selection online. If one religious congregation suffers from hypocrisy or bad music, we can move on to the next. If the bonds of community chafe, it is because we have not yet found that well-ordered collection of good people that we are entitled to be affiliated with. And by the way, if you are still new enough here at All Souls to be thinking that this might at last be the group that will live up to your standards and deserve your membership, let me assure you that it's not. These folks are just as annoying and dysfunctional as any community you have left. And I am no wiser or purer than the average of my colleagues. The problem is, Alain de Botton is right. We are all of us more difficult to live with than we imagine, or than anyone is willing to tell us. Each of us is crazy in our own special way, and it is rarely in someone else's interest to make both us and themselves uncomfortable by pointing this out. Community does not happen because we finally stumble across the group of people who have perfected personal integrity and unconditional love. Rather, it grows in a jumbled sort of way wherever people have agreed to make the effort to put up with each other, or wherever they believe they have no choice. It is my sense that our mobility and consumer mentality play into each other, as Reverend Heather Lou suggests, by continually inviting us to cut off from community whenever we feel slighted or irritated or uncomfortable, rather than working through our own and others' craziness to a new level of understanding and patience. In other times and cultures where it was less possible to move away from family or leave town or change churches, individuals had to find ways to come to terms with the imperfect others who made up their homes and neighborhoods and religious communities. This could be oppressive if it meant having to tolerate bullying or abuse. And I am not suggesting that such constraint is ever a good idea. But as we concluded at one gender justice conference recently, not all discomfort is harm. Indeed, Sometimes discomfort is the necessary condition for growth. And many times, other people are working just as hard at putting up with you as you are struggling to put up with them. Religious community is something of an anomaly in 21st century America. Families are still held together by an emotional centripetal force that makes it deeply wrenching to cut off from them, and that maintains a connection even from that cut off position, as many of us know from experience. Neighborhoods and work communities are reinforced by an economic inertia that usually makes changing them by moving or getting a new job more costly than staying put. But what is the force that holds a congregation together so that it survives the mutual irritation that is an inevitable part of the human condition? One thing that helps us put up with each other is having a common enemy. You can learn a lot about putting up with others, as well as about your own brand of craziness, from that kind of experience. But once the threat goes away, if there is nothing else to hold the heart of community together, it quickly disintegrates. So as a long-term strategy, that is not so good. The strange thing that summons us to stay in community and learn to put up with each other in the voluntary association of the congregation is covenant, the promise that we make to each other that says we will in fact hang in there together, even when it gets really annoying and difficult and uncomfortable and tiresome, precisely because we want that network of relationship that is the only soil in which human nature truly thrives, where we are known in our irritating craziness, and people put up with us anyway, and we learn to put up with them, because that is how we all grow. Our closing hymn this morning proposes that we are not merely our own, that we are bound together here on the earth through the generations, by families and friends and strangers that show us who we are. The third verse says this: "Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice, willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care." I want to suggest that we notice some of those liturgies of care, remembering that liturgia means the work of the people in worship. For these are the techniques that help us as we struggle with learning to put up with each other in the service of community. One that we have already observed this morning is our quilt making to welcome new babies among us. We could, of course, if we thought there was any real danger of these infants suffering from cold, send someone out to just buy a blanket for them. But that would not help us build community as we do in learning the family's preference for colors, in contributing and preparing the fabrics, and spending several hours together to assemble this unique gift of love and blessing for one of our own. That is a liturgy of care. Another example is our New Year aspiration tree out in the lobby. If you will take a moment to write on one of the shining stars a hope that you are carrying into 2019 as it begins, and hang that star on the silver branches. Then next week at our final holiday celebration, we will each take home another person's star and hold that aspiration in your mind and heart throughout the year while someone else holds yours. keeping one another's hopes alive is a liturgy of care. Finally, I offer you the possibility that when you find yourself struggling with the challenge of putting up with the folks in this congregation, or in your family, or your neighborhood, or any other community that you may be part of, that instead of letting your discomfort lead you to cut off and destroy those bonds that are essential to your physical and emotional and spiritual and mental well-being, you might experiment with praying for those folks. By this, I don't necessarily mean anything about God, and certainly not asking God to fix what is wrong with someone other than you so that they can be less annoying. What I mean is holding that person or those people with gentle, curious attention in your mind, since curiosity is always the antidote to judgment, and wondering what might truly help them to thrive and be at peace in the world. I mean, imagining the burden of pain that they may be carrying, and what it would be like for them to be released from that pain, and seeking within yourself the goodwill to wish that for them. You may or may not be able to find that goodwill in a given moment, but it is always helpful to look for it. That too is a liturgy of care. Dearly beloved, if there were one resolution I would ask you to carry into the unfolding possibilities of the new year, it would be this. Be assured that the perfect community, the one that will accept you exactly as you are and ask nothing of you in growth or change, whose other members will never exasperate you or make you uncomfortable, is a mirage, a fantasy, peddled by the profit seekers who will sell you death if it accrues them power or wealth. Recognize that true community, those life-sustaining connections that bind us to the needs and hopes and craziness of other people, requires of us patience and struggle and the capacity for discomfort. There is no easy counterfeit that will save us. We must put up with each other in all our fallibility and finitude. We must give to each other, to all people, and to life itself, liturgies of care. Here's one more. Let's rise together and sing.
Human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, earth names us, past and present, peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, tongues living liturgies of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. The good you do today will be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. The bonds of authentic community will make you uncomfortable. Embrace them anyway. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. The path out of loneliness is always to mend what we can. So be it.
Ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works